Good morning, and thank you for joining today's MCEC webinar, Access to Capital, Future Strategies to Support Advanced Energy. This session is part of the Maryland Clean Energy Center's Connecting to the Energy Economy speaker series. I want to thank our sponsors, particularly Cone Resnick, for sponsoring the program overall. My name is Kathy Magruder, and I'm the Executive Director of the Maryland Clean Energy Center. First, we'd like to get started with a few housekeeping items. We're going to do some polling questions with the audience. We'd like you to be engaged. So we're going to practice our first polling question to get a little bit of information about the size of the group joining us today. You'll see a toggle button on your slides. To answer a poll question, just click on the button next to the answer, then click Submit. The results of our poll will be showing shortly on your screen. You can see that it's mostly just you in the room. We'll be using this polling feature a couple times today, so we hope you'll participate. The second live polling question we have this morning is about the industry sector that you represent. Remember just to click on the button next to your answer and then hit Submit. And the answer should be showing up shortly. It's a pretty diverse audience. This webinar is part of a series, as I mentioned. We'll hope you'll be able to join us for future sessions. Recordings of each session and additional information are available online at www.mdcleanenergy.org/speaker-series. Again, this session is brought to you by our sponsor, the Maryland Commercial PACE program. For more information, you can find the PACE link online at the MCEC website. And now it is my distinct pleasure to introduce our moderator today, my friend Mike Gill, who is the chairman of Evergreen Advisors. Mike is going to welcome our panelists. I want to tell you a little bit about Mike, just so you know who he is. He is the chairman of Evergreen Advisors, a business leader with over 4 decades of experience as an entrepreneur. Mike harbors a secret desire to be a pirate, and we like to enable him in that regard. In his previous career path, he started at IBM in sales and marketing. He founded several companies, including a company called Americom, a telecommunications company, another called First Page. He served as the chairman of Curtis Engine, which is a Baltimore power generator company. And he was tapped by Governor Larry Hogan to lead the Maryland Department of Commerce from 2015 to 2019. Mike is a Clemson Tiger, and he is a big fan of their team. We are so happy to have Mike Gill with us here this morning to lead this astute panel. Mike, over to you.
Kathy, thank you. Thank you, Kathy. We've known each other, I guess, going on 6 years now since I came and visited and got my sword and Pirates patch and everything. And Sabrina and Pamela, thank you for all you've done to bring everybody together today. We're going to have a lot of fun. You know, whenever I hear that, Kath, 4 decades of experience, I think, holy cow, that's an old guy. You gotta be around a long time to get 4 decades. But let's get right into it, because I think we got such a great topic. And what we really have is an amazing panel. We got a great panel today. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce briefly each of the 4 panelists, and then I'm going to flip it to them to take a couple minutes and give you a little profile of themselves. First, I'd like to introduce Bessie Clark. Bessie's Director of Private Investment, Hannon Armstrong, headquartered in Annapolis, Maryland, state capital of the Free State. Bessie, please take a couple minutes.
Great, thank you. Thanks so much, Mike. And it's great to be here with everyone, at least virtually. So Hannon is an investment firm that provides capital for climate change solutions. And the company has been around for more than 40 years. We are actually the first publicly traded company that is solely dedicated to making investments in climate change. And I think what makes Hannon very unique is that each investment that we make must pass a rigorous test to prove that it will either lower carbon emissions or increase resiliency to climate change. And we actually call this climate positive investing. At Hannon, on the private investment team, I focus mostly on the structuring and execution of our solar and wind transactions. And that includes equity investments, debt investments, joint ventures, and some other financing structures. And my background previously was actually in commercial and industrial scale solar project finance. And I also spent 7 years in structured finance at UBS. So anyway, I will pause there and just say that I'm thrilled to be here with other great leaders and looking forward to talking some more about what we're all seeing in the market.
Great, thank you, Bessie. Next up, another one of my new best friends, Trent Allen. Trent's the CEO and founder of Sustainable Capital Advisors. And Trent, glad you're a part of this gang today.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you to Kathy and MCEC for this invitation to join this panel. As Mike mentioned, I am Managing Director and CEO of Sustainable Capital Advisors. We are a financial advisory firm focused on developing innovative capital solutions for sustainable infrastructure projects. And for us, that means energy, water, transportation, agriculture, and the built environment. The work that we do is broken really in 3 categories. The majority of our work is in transaction services. And so that really is working with developers or utilities or even capital providers on structuring projects really from concept to closing. So working through how you structure a project, how you identify capital, really how do you make a project work and put it in place for folks like Bessie and potentially Jigger to invest in. Then another part of the work that we do is really around strategic consulting. And that's where we worked with a number of companies helping to do market assessment studies. Or how would they, if they were looking to enter into a new market, they're a solar developer looking to enter a new market, how would they enter? Who are the strategic partners? What types of structures are in place? Really helping them develop their overall strategic business plan. And the last part of what we do is really a new set of work for us. Is really around sort of research and policy, and that's working with a number of organizations, including foundations, nonprofits, including working with the Coalition for Green Capital and MCEC and a few others, and really doing work that really ties together our expertise and experience in the finance space, tied to some of the levers related to policy that can really accelerate deployment of capital in the sustainable infrastructure markets. And so prior to starting SCA, I worked in banking at Citigroup for a dozen years in the utility and infrastructure space, focusing a lot on renewable energy, energy infrastructure generally. And so this has been not quite 40 years, but I am glad to say half of that now been spent in the energy infrastructure space, and really look forward to this panel of old friends and new friends as well.
Yeah, thank you, Trent. Really appreciate it. Jeffrey, I know you're out there. There you are. There's your handsome face on the screen. Jeffrey Schaub, Executive Director, Coalition for Green Capital. Had a great conversation with Jeffrey a few days ago. Terrific background. Found himself in New York joining Coalition, and didn't think that was where he was going to spend a part of his career, but he's still there, and Coalition's doing great things. Jeffrey, good morning.
Morning. Thanks so much, Mike, and thanks, Kathy, for inviting me to join the conversation. Really happy to be here. As Mike said, I'm the Executive Director of the Coalition for Green Capital. We're a 501c3 nonprofit that works mostly in the US, but increasingly around the world to help develop mission-driven clean energy finance organizations, generally called green banks. They use a range of financing tools and market development strategies to try to mobilize even greater private investment into clean energy and climate-related solutions. We've been fortunate enough to do a lot of work in Maryland with MCEC, with the Montgomery County Green Bank, with the Climate Access Fund, a lot of work with the DC Green Bank, as well as some of the other green banks that folks may be familiar with. And now we're heavily focused on federal legislation to create a national green bank or a national climate bank, sponsored by our, all of our favorite senators, Senator Van Hollen from Maryland. And the simple framing for our thinking is, today non-hydro renewables make up about 10% market share of electricity, and whether you think it's by 2035 or 2050, that 10% has got to grow to about 70%. And just put that in perspective, over the last 15 years, non-hydro renewable market share grew from about 2% to about 10%. And so instead of growing only 8% over 15 years, it's got to grow 60% over 15 years. That is transformative. That is like a monstrous transformation that is in no way going to occur with business as usual. The public sector has a big role to play, but it's not going to be the primary driver of this, and it doesn't have enough money to do it itself. And so we need to find techniques that can leverage far more private investment and drive private investment into clean energy markets and sectors that are chronically underserved, and particularly with a focus on low-income communities, frontline communities, communities of color, to make sure that everybody in the country can enjoy the benefits of a clean energy transition, and specifically doing it in ways that bring down the cost of energy. The transition to a clean energy future can't be one in which consumers and businesses have to pay more for their energy. It has to be less. And so innovative financing solutions can be a really big part of that. We're really excited to be here and be part of the conversation with this really wonderful panel. Thanks, Mike.
Great. Thank you, Jeffrey. And our fourth panelist, low-key, low-profile guy. Hope I can bring him out of his shell today when we get into some of these Q&As. My other new best friend, Jigger Shah, great background, currently president and co-founder of Generate Capital, and a busy guy in this space. Jigger, welcome.
Thanks for having me. No, I'm super excited to be here. We've been active in the space for a long time, and I've been in Maryland this entire time. So the company Generate Capital was founded in 2014 and is headquartered out of San Francisco. I've been here in Maryland, and we've got a pretty good contingency of folks here. We build, own, and operate sustainable infrastructure for companies, governments, and communities. We've got about 25 technology and project development partners on the platform now that serve over 400 end customers with 2,000 assets. And, we're one of the largest owners of battery storage, electric vehicles, hydrogen forklifts, fuel cells, anaerobic digesters, and all sorts of frontier technologies, including community solar. So super excited to be here with all of you, and excited to be part of this panel.
Thank you, Jigger. Well, let's get going. And I'm going to start off. I've got a question for. Now, I think we're going to hold these till the end of the Q&As, but we'll be back to the polling questions. So Bessie, I want to kick off with you, and then again, as a follow-up, Jeffrey, Jigger, Trent, any follow-ups to whatever questions I might have of each of you. So Bessie, here's one to kick it off. There is a fund that Fidelity has that's referred to as a Fidelity Select Environmental and Alternative Energy Fund. 1989, June of 89 is when it was introduced. Through May of 20, it has returned 4.4% annually. The focus of the fund is on companies involved in activities around renewable and alternative energy, pollution control, recycling, et cetera. So 4.4% during that 21-year period. Now, interestingly enough, half of those years since it was introduced, the Republicans were in the White House, and the other half, the Democrats were in the White House. Does it really matter who's in the White House?
That's a great question, Mike, and certainly an important topic for this month and next month. And I guess what I would say is that, you know, I think that what we've seen at least is that returns can be strong with whatever administration is in the White House. And we've seen that in our own business. And I think, you know, for Hannon, we've been public since 2013 and have raised more than $8 billion in debt and equity to continue making investments in climate change solutions. However, I think that it's worth noting having an administration that is openly hostile to renewable energy can certainly hinder the, you know, the overall pace of growth in the market. And I think perhaps even more importantly, you know, what that means for the climate crisis is obviously, you know, a topic and a consequence that's important to all of us. So, you know, would love to hear what some of the other panelists think about that. But I think I would say, you know, certainly some interesting considerations given the current administration's position.
Good. Thank you, Bessie. Hey, gang, does anybody want to add to that?
I'm happy to.
Please, Jigger.
Pile in. I think, look, I think Bessie's exactly right. It's really not about Democrat and Republican. It's really more about folks who see our industry as making their local community better and providing economic development, and folks who don't see it, right? And there's a lot of folks who don't see it from both sides of the aisles, right? But like when you think about what we've accomplished, just last year, we've had about $300 billion of investment into sustainability solutions across the United States. Some states have attracted that money. Maryland is one that has been, you know, sort of so-so in its aggressiveness to attract that money, right? I'd say New Jersey and other states around us have been more aggressive around getting that money, right? And so I think, you know, the state has to do its job and put together the rules of the road. And then we do our job and assemble the capital to make sure a lot of that investment takes place. But I don't think it's a Republican Democrat thing. It's more of an economic development thing. Great.
Thanks, Jigger. You know, I'm glad we're not deep into the discussion and we finally heard economic development. Because at the end of the day, that's really what it needs to be.
Yeah.
If we saw it through that lens, it's amazing how people would probably have a different perspective.
Yeah,
Jeffrey.
Just to add to that, I think you know, for a very, very, very long time, from a policy perspective, addressing climate change was presented as, you know, Americans have to eat their vegetables, that everybody has to sacrifice, there has to be some cost. This is going to hurt, but we're going to come through better on the other end. And I think, again, as you know, not placing it around parties, I think we finally turned a corner where, you know, I mean, the polling shows, like, amazingly, we have actually reached a point in this country where the majority of Americans believe climate change is real, believe it's man-made, and want government to do something about it. Like, we shouldn't take that as a given. It took us longer than anywhere else in the world for that to happen, but we're finally there, and it's powerful and it's important. And we finally reached a point where the discussion of how to address climate change is entirely around what you know, what Jigger just said. It's economic development, it's jobs, it's lower energy costs, it's improving communities. It's not that people have to sacrifice something by switching to clean energy. And I think that's a really, really dramatic transformation of how we talk about this.
Excellent. Thank you, Jeff.
And actually, I was going to add to what Jeff said is that I think the quicker we can get from eating our vegetables to basically thinking about sort of sustainable infrastructure and resiliency as part of what we need to do, that provides superior returns or similar returns compared to other investment opportunities. And some of the work that, you know, sort of the success of Hannon and Jigger, both to Generate and prior, I think that's really what we're looking for. But the key to that, to me, is that, you know, we have to go a long way in a very short amount of time. So while you know, it may not all be at the federal level, I think part of what I hear and I see that there's a lot of that's happening that's supportive of these types of technologies that are happening at the state and the local levels that can help accelerate it. And to the extent that we have, you know, policies and support, or even pressure that comes in from, or opportunities that can be seen from outside parties, that is what I think will help really accelerate the deployment of these types of technologies, recognizing that, you know, we do have an opportunity here to both do well and do good in the sense of addressing climate change as well.
Thank you, Trent. Thank you, everyone. Let's coming back to you, Jigger. I've got a question. Let's get rolling on this. You wrote an article recently on the need for the U.S. to adopt, you know, infrastructure asset recycling program. If we really did that, which we should, what would it mean? Just rattle off what you mean by it, and then what it would mean to our economy.
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, this is something that's been done for years in the UK and in Australia and other places. And, you know, what it means is that in the United States, municipalities have generally been wooed by the fact that they have very low cost tax-exempt debt to own infrastructure that they generally don't run well, and, you know, and then end up having to pay back the bonds. And what you find is, for a lot of this infrastructure, if they were to sell it to private sector buyers, you would actually have the infrastructure run better, right? So this goes from everything from parking garages to wastewater treatment plants, right? So when you look at like wastewater treatment plants, for instance, we're one of the largest owners of anaerobic digesters in the United States. Most wastewater treatment plants have anaerobic digesters. They're only used at 50% of their capacity because they overbuilt them. And they're not taking in any private sector waste. They don't take any food waste or manure from dairy farms or the things, when the infrastructure is already there and it's just underutilized, mostly because the government can't figure out the rules around how to do it. And so the way the infrastructure recycling programs work in Australia is that the government sells the infrastructure, right? So the state of Maryland or the county of Montgomery County would sell the infrastructure. They would get the proceeds from selling that infrastructure, but they'd separately get a bonus payment from the federal government to encourage them to sell that infrastructure. And what you find is that the infrastructure utilization in Australia and in the UK are far higher than the infrastructure utilization here as a result.
So the feds aren't on board yet. We don't have that program where if somebody says
not in the
do
US.
it,
No,
not in the US. Please, Jeff, Bessie, Trent, any comments around recycling asset programs?
Sure. So Jigger, I'll ask. So in that context, is it truly just on the operation side where you are able to gain efficiencies that increases that improves the overall operations of the projects and infrastructure? How do you gain the savings there?
Yeah, it's truly, I mean, because you have to live within whatever labor contracts and the things are there. So it's not a union thing. It's really more around, I mean, just to give you an example, Montgomery County schools, right? Like, so in the UK, all schools are basically privately owned and operated, right? Montgomery County schools, on average, 5 schools don't open up on September because the air conditioning doesn't work. They know every year that they're going to start schools on September 1st, but they don't actually, bother to fix it before it starts. So you now lose all that productivity from all those parents and all that childcare and everything else because kids are sent home because air conditioning doesn't work, right? In the UK, if that occurs, the private sector provider just doesn't get the rent payment that month, right? If they don't meet the service level agreements, which means the air conditioning has to work, they just don't get paid. And so amazingly, they actually make sure the air conditioning works, right? It's one of those things where in this country, we just accept such poor infrastructure and such poor sort of infrastructure operation. And we're just fine with it. We're just like, well, most cars in this country, don't live as long as it should because of potholes in the road. And we're like, well, maybe there's a way to do it better, but we can't think of one. So we're just going to leave it the way it is, right? And other countries have figured out how to do it better. And, and the government has the ability to set whatever service level agreements they want.
But does the change of ownership of the underlying asset ensure that you have better operations, or could you improve the operations while keeping the same ownership structure in place?
No, I think the politics of it doesn't allow you to leave it the way it is, right? With the city council and state legislatures love blaming other people, right? They love saying it's their fault over there. And what we're going to do is fine them for not actually doing their job right. They're not going to blame state workers for not having the air conditioning done properly or whatever it is, right? So you end up in a situation where the politically, it's a lot easier to say, we've done this deal with this outside group. This outside group needs to meet these service level agreements. And if they don't meet it, we have the ability to short their payment, right? And it's like a beautiful way politically for them to get it done right, but also blame somebody else when something doesn't work.
Hey, Trent, let me stay with you, partner, with a question. Much has been written about purpose and companies understanding their role in society. How do you view corporate purpose and its impact on long-term profitability? I mean, it's got to be more than a slogan, right?
It should, right? You're asking me a deep philosophical question on this.
That's like a blue book question, isn't it?
I know I might have to get another one, but you reminded me of our time. I think there should be some purpose beyond just profit, right? I think there should.
Yep.
And so, to the extent, so I'll just speak about for us, because I can't speak for everyone. It's like we've decided that what we are really looking to do is to spend our time looking at the places that need innovation, right? So working with nonprofits on directing our experience in finance to creating structures for low-income community solar projects, right? And the reason for that is because we think that there's any number of other community solar projects may happen, but areas where there's specific experience and expertise required, and where we believe that we can move it forward a little bit, that's where we think that that's the space that we should occupy. And it's the reason for us to try to make this thing, a little bit better and move things forward. And so I think purpose is important in organizations, partly because it helps you have your North Star about what you're doing, what you're getting involved in.
Excellent.
Right? The types of projects that we pursue, and
Yep.
The types of partners we work with, and the types of clients that we have. And so I think identifying that is incredibly important.
Yeah. Anybody want to add to Trent's comments? Hannon, you go ahead, Hannon. I mean, Hannon, you go ahead, Bessie, because I have a Hannon question.
I'd love to chime in there, and definitely agree with those comments. I think for Hannon, purpose is absolutely integral to our investment due diligence. And, our purpose is to make climate positive investments with superior risk adjusted returns. So in terms of kind of what does that mean, at the end of the day, each investment that we make has to pass a test that I mentioned before, that it's essentially neutral to negative on carbon emissions. And then we actually at Hannon go one step further, which is to quantify how many metric tons of carbon are offset per dollar invested for each of our transactions. So we actually call this carbon count, and we include a carbon count for every transaction that closes and include that in our annual report, just to essentially tie it back to what we feel like is probably the most important metric, which is really carbon and how much carbon we can offset.
Great. Thank you, Bessie. I actually had that question written down about due diligence and purpose. Staying with you for a second, Bessie, what are some of the things that Hannon is investing in these days?
Sure. So we invest $1 billion annually and have a little over $6 billion of managed assets in total. We invest in 3 key asset classes. First is what we call our behind the meter sector. So this covers residential and commercial and industrial scale solar, storage, and also energy efficiency investments. The second asset class is grid connected. So we're active in onshore wind, utility scale solar, and also solar land, so essentially purchasing the land underneath utility scale solar projects. And then third is other sustainable infrastructure markets, and examples would be stormwater remediation investments and ecological restoration. Just to give a few examples of some of our recent investments, which really touch on each of the asset classes. In July, we actually announced an investment with ENGIE in 2.3 gigawatts of utility scale wind and solar. And for that investment, HAN was in a preferred equity cash flow position. Last year, we also announced partnerships with 2 developers that are local to the metro area. One is Empower Energy, and we're going to be providing capital to them for the distributed solar projects that they're developing across the country. And the second is actually Summit Ridge Energy, who is also local, and they have been active in the community solar space. So taking advantage of the community solar program here in the state. We're very excited about community solar, and I think it will be a big growth area in the distributed solar sector. And I guess just kind of final comment is that, at a high level, what we have seen in the space is that there is, really an abundance of capital waiting to be put to work to, get projects moving and continue making these investments.
Great, thank you, Bessie. Any follow-on from anybody before we go to the next question? All right, let's Jigger, can I come back to you for another one?
Sure.
I'll put this under the big idea category. It shouldn't have to be a big idea, but you and I chatted about it. It's been said a couple times during our conversation so far. Electric vehicles in Maryland. Cowen, the investment bank, I heard them on Squawk Box the other day. One of their folks said that in 2030, 1 out of 4 vehicles are going to be electric. Why should Maryland be a leader? What's in it for Maryland if they can take the lead on this and really become the role model for the 50 states on electric vehicles? So your thoughts,
right? Maryland is one of the most aggressive managers of healthcare costs in the country. People actually look to Maryland on the hospital reimbursement rates and all sorts of things that they've innovated on.
That's
Guess
right.
what internal combustion cars do? They basically spit out their pollution into neighborhoods locally in Maryland and cause asthma and all sorts of lung disease, right? Heart disease, all sorts of things are linked directly to ground level ozone and ground level particulate matter, right? And so Maryland pays the bill for all that. Now, they may have some of it going to Medicare and some of it going to federal sources, but a lot of it comes out of the Maryland budget. So the question becomes, if you've got a bunch of people in Maryland who are already interested in buying EVs, why wouldn't Maryland figure out how to convince them to go EV faster and save that money on their healthcare budgets? It's pretty straightforward. On top of that, Maryland has some of the shortest commutes in the country. So when you think about most of the people who live in Maryland will never drive more than 200 miles a day, ever. And there are so many vehicles available today that have 200 miles of range and above. And so you're in the situation where Pepco has launched Steer, right? In the Maryland or DC area. That company, I think, has just been acquired by another company. But when you look at the state of Maryland and the Public Service Commission, crickets, right? On top of that, Maryland is a huge producer of electricity from the nuclear power plants that we have to other things. The PJM electricity grid that we're in has a 30% reserve margin, which means that even on super hot air conditioning days, we have no increase in the wholesale power prices in the state. And so you're in a situation where we want to sell more kilowatt hours. The more kilowatt hours we sell, the lower the rates are for everyone who lives in Maryland. So it's a win-win all the way around. It's a better air quality, lower cost per mile, right? So the citizens who get the electric cars have more money in their pocket, You have better economics for the electric utility companies because now they're utilizing their infrastructure better. And you actually take all of this expertise that Maryland already has in electric vehicles from the University of Maryland and other places, and you actually start to create economic development in the state, which is something that, we just haven't focused on in the state.
I'm going to feel guilty today, Jig, when I drive home in my gas guzzling car.
You should.
I'm going to put a picture of you on the dashboard, and we'll get Governor Hogan. We'll get the governor.
I can get you into a 200-mile range vehicle for less than $20,000 today.
Please, Trent, Jeffrey, Bessie, any follow on to Jigger's comments? Jeffrey?
Yeah, I couldn't agree. I mean, the health budget argument is a sound one that just makes all sorts of sense, and I think just having good leaders who can identify those connections is really what it takes to get done. I think, if putting electric vehicle adoption in the broad conversation of electrification in general, like how do we electrify other energy uses beyond traditional electricity uses, as Jigger said, this is an opportunity to bring utilities to the conversation where we can sort of transform the conversation around the climate transition from one that utilities have historically been resistant to one where they see massive business opportunities, both from selling increased power to electrified vehicles, but also for a chance to build out their rate base. Look at what's happening in California with some of the decisions made by the regulators out there to allow the utilities to invest hundreds of millions of dollars in the construction and make ready positions of charging stations that become part of the rate base, and they can earn a return on for decades to come. So it's a way of turning the conversation, focusing on electrification is a way of turning the conversation to something that actually brings utilities to the table.
Yeah, and maybe while we're on it, just to put a plug in for the Maryland Clean Energy Act that passed in 2019. Aggressive. We've all talked about the numbers. It's almost like put any number at all out there, and we never hit any of them when it comes to our goals and objectives about power and clean energy. But one of their goals, 50% of the total grid by 2030 to be clean energy, and 100% by 2040. Do people just make these numbers up? Because we never come close to any of them. But I guess people feel good by just at least putting it out there.
Well, we don't make the tough decisions.
Yeah, go ahead,
Jay. We don't make the tough decisions, right?
Yeah.
Maryland's problem is not that it doesn't know how to do this. In fact, we invented the solar PPA here in Maryland, right? Our problem is that we don't have good conversations. We have a whole bunch of rich people who own ag land in the ag reserve. They don't pay any taxes by nature of their ability to have owned ag land multiple generations back. They're a huge, powerful block, and they say, oh, we need to leave Maryland pristine, as though that is the argument for growing more corn and soybeans in the ag land reserves. Just 3% of the ag reserves would power the entire state of Maryland with solar power. The entire state, right? But solar developers in Maryland can't find land because all of it's in the ag reserve. And we just allow a bunch of folks who don't care about equity issues or other things to block solar development in the state. So we're in a situation where we actually have a very clear pathway to becoming 100% clean energy in the state. And in fact, we could export power to DC and other places that's clean. We have offshore wind resources that we're trying to develop. We have lots of stuff going on. But instead of having rational economic development conversations in the state, we sort of let it all play out at the county level, where people who are anti-development can actually have their loudest voices heard. And it makes no sense whatsoever. We are literally within, if you give us 3 years of economic development, we could turn the entire state to 100% clean energy. That's how much solar was installed in a 3-year block of time in North Carolina. I can't believe that North Carolina is 100 times better than us in Maryland.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that are have dialed in for the Zoom webinar today, and Jerry, we could turn this into a fundraiser. It's not clear in 2022 who's going to replace Governor Hogan. I might get behind you.
I think Governor Hogan should do this. This is what I'm saying. To me, it doesn't make any sense. This is not a Republican-Democrat issue. The problem is that we have stakeholders, and they're not. You and I both know that even my county commissioner Our executive here in Montgomery County is anti-solar. And so it's one of those things where you have folks who are admittedly progressive on this side and folks who are admittedly not progressive on this side who are doing different things. I mean, Purdue out in, you know, Republican strong land over in the Eastern Shore is one of the largest users of solar power in the state. And so it's not a Republican Democrat thing. The problem is that we need to commit ourselves to using the expertise that Maryland has. We have literally some of the smartest people in the world who live here, and they all work in North Carolina or New Jersey or other places while living in Maryland because the opportunities aren't here. SunEdison was the largest development company in the world for solar, and all those people are still here, right? All the people who worked at Terraform are still here. Like, they're all here, they just work outside of here. Hannon Armstrong does some business here, but most of their business is in the other 49 states. It's one of these things where we actually have all the expertise here. You bring Bessie on a panel, you bring me and some other folks, and you just solve it.
Fabulous. Any quick ones, and we're going to go to the next one. This is a great, we could have the whole, maybe, Kathy Magruder, I know you're listening. Maybe we do another one in the future. We just talk about this stuff. No blue books, real stuff. Hey, Jeffrey, let me come to you with a question. We had a great discussion a few days ago about the work of your organization. The topic, equity and environmental justice. How do you measure success? It's a two-part question. How do you measure success, and are the opportunity zones helpful?
Yeah, so both good questions. And measuring success on, first I'll admit, I'm not an EJ expert by any means, and there are people I'm sure on this call and on this panel who know more than me on this. I think environmental justice encompasses a couple of different distinct issues. One which probably is the easiest one to address is that low-income communities, communities of color, are left behind in the clean energy transition. They don't have access to the same clean energy solutions that wealthier households and communities have in the way of rooftop solar, building efficiency, things that can actually improve the comfort and health and condition of their home and lower their energy costs. And those are typically the households that need those things the most because they have the highest energy burden. They're paying a higher proportion of their income towards their energy bills. And so part of the environmental justice story is just giving them access, building small businesses that are designed to serve those communities, developing the financing solutions that are sort of designed to serve those communities and those households. So that's just, and frankly, that's the easiest part because it's not really inventing anything new. It's sort of taking existing mechanisms and tools and just actually directing them in different geographies. The more complicated parts of environmental justice have to do with one, sort of the economic development angle and how do you build businesses, create jobs, and accumulate wealth in the communities that have not been a part of the clean energy transition in terms of the upside. How do you provide those communities a chance to not just be the sort of recipients of clean energy, but to be the drivers of that clean energy transformation themselves. And then the last is, which for many is probably the most prominent, is just the communities that tend to be directly next to high polluting industrial facilities of various kinds tend to be communities of color or low income communities. And so it's those families, it's those kids that suffer the ill health effects from living next to, God knows what industrial facility that's throwing crap in the air. All of those are problems that are sort of solved through investment in economic development and money in one way or another. Measuring success so you can think of sort of how do you measure success against each one of those metrics. You can look at employment rates bifurcated by race and income level. You can look at clean energy adoption rates broken down those ways. There's lots of different ways of doing it. It's not going to happen on its own, I think, is the important piece. That the way private activity works sort of naturally and as it should is, private actors look for the lowest hanging fruit first. They look for the opportunities where they can have the highest return and the easiest projects to get done, and they sort of rank order projects that way and go down the list. It's how capitalism works, and it works really well for getting the markets growing, but it doesn't mean you get an equitable distribution of how those markets grow. And so somehow we have to develop mechanisms, both from a capital and a policy standpoint, that can drive investment into where otherwise wouldn't be prioritized.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Would anybody like to add anything to that? It's an important topic, and it's a hard one. Like you said, Jeffrey, it's hard. Please, anything?
Well, it takes intentionality. Go ahead, Bessie.
Yeah.
Sorry, yeah, I was just gonna add one sort of stat that I really like onto Jeff's great comments, which is that I think the clean energy revolution is very integral to the topic of environmental justice, and when it comes to jobs, I think so clean energy jobs outnumber fossil fuel jobs by more than 3 to 1. And the numbers that I have are for 2019, 3.4 million clean energy jobs relative to 1.2 million fossil fuel related jobs. And I think these are the kind of metrics that we have to bring into the discourse on these topics, just so that people understand, what clean energy can do for the economy and, for employment, which is obviously going to be one of the, most important topics for the election and kind of going forward. So I just wanted to interject with that one statistic, because I think it's a very good one that kind of puts things in context.
And I'll just push back a little bit. I actually don't think it's that hard, right? We know we need to employ people, right? So the question becomes, let's figure out how to identify people, businesses that can participate. So if you're looking for minority businesses, right? If that becomes part of your focus, then how do you create the environment and go look for companies to either expand what they're doing or to grow them? One statistic, we'll have a report out soon about diversity in clean energy finance. And one of the interesting things from the survey that was conducted mentioned that 60% of finance and clean energy finance type companies are interested in diverse issues related to diversity and increasing diversity within organizations. 20% actually have programs or pieces inside their organizations that are geared towards recruiting. And so what we see is there is a big gap between what you'll say you're willing to do and the actions that you take to ensure that particular outcome. So it comes back to something that Jigger said. Part of it's intentionality and part of it's action, right? And so I would argue that today, if we wanted to increase the number of investments to women and minority businesses, we can do that. We'll have to identify people. We'll have to take the painstaking effort and the way that we do in many other industries to really ensure that they grow. And so I say that thinking about equity and inclusion with regards to clean energy is within our control, and it really takes a concerted effort. And one last thing I'll just mention is that part of the thing that we need to wrestle with, particularly when it comes to low income, is making sure that we have the policy cues correct, such that we eliminate barriers from adoption with regards to how we provide incentives through potential participants and customers through the tax code, particularly that are tied to tax credits, right? So I think that is one of the areas that really becomes a sticking block when we're talking about being intentional about serving low income, but recognizing that if they don't have a tax burden, that they can't get the full value of some of the investments and have to be thrust into other types of structures where others get to monetize those particular types of benefits. And so that's how we think about sort of bringing intentionality, not only to who may be doing the work and who may be providing capital, but also into how we think about the structures related to policy and how we incentivize clean energy as well.
Great, thank you, Trent. Any one more comment, if anybody has one on this topic?
I just want to say, to just double down on what Trenton's saying, I totally agree. And I mean, just to sort of say, this is what it means to be anti-racist. It's like it's not just enough to identify the thing that has to be done. You actually have to do it. Like, if you want your organization to be more diverse, you can't just say it. You have to make a plan of action of how you're going to do it. If you say you want to great federal policy mechanisms to drive investment into low income, you have to acknowledge the fact that the main policy tool that exists, the ITC, can't be used by many of those households.
Correct.
And then do something about it. It doesn't mean you throw the whole thing out, but you have to like at least identify that fact and say something about it. And yeah, I mean, it's just the tools and the ideas are there. I totally agree. It's just being intentional about taking the steps to do something about it.
Hello. Oh gosh. Oh gosh.
Yeah.
We're here.
Are you there?
Yeah, Mike.
We can't see you now.
Uh-oh, I disappeared somewhere.
Yeah, you're off to the side. We want to see that shining face there.
Oh, boogers. Come on, let's see. Okay, but you guys are all still there though, right?
Yeah, and we can hear you.
Okay, let's keep going and I'll figure this out. Got a couple more questions and then we want to go to the audience. And Trent, I'm going to come back to you to start this. Topic, smart cities, P3s, public-private partnerships, financing clean energy programs. What's the biggest disconnect between the public and the private sector on making that happen?
I think part of it comes back a little bit to where Jigger started in talking about some of this. In my experience, the disconnect becomes public sector identifying exactly what they want as an outcome from the private sector, and then mobilizing a structure that will ensure that outcome. So, for instance, if it is around retrofitting, street lights and utilizing a partnership, what risk are you willing to have being borne by the side of the developer versus the side of the public entity? And I think when you get into these particular types of P3 structures, which in some respects, almost everything is technically a P3, you get into sort of how do you allocate risk between parties, and having the public sector understanding exactly how the structure and transaction works, such that the public sector can do what they do well, and put the risk and put many of the requirements, particularly around performance, onto the side of the private sector. And I think that's one of the challenges that exists in really executing these projects and really having well structured and well executed projects that people can actually finance as well.
Anything to add to Trent?
Well said.
Yeah.
Two more questions from, and then we're going to the general audience. Hold on, I see something here. My smiley face is back.
Yep.
There we go. Actually, I just went out to get a cup of coffee. What the heck? Just kidding. Just kidding. Let's make this one a rapid fire, and then we're going to wrap it up with a bigger question. Here's a rapid fire. Just top of mind, COVID-19, how we have learned to work the last 6 months. Is this the new normal? Bessie, what do you think?
I'd say rapid fire response, it'll be the new normal for the immediate to medium term. Long term, I think we see a normalization. Overall, we're not seeing a slowdown in any activity. I think there's a lot of great investment opportunities out there in the space. And as I mentioned before, I think we're seeing a lot of capital still very interested. So anyway, that's my quick take.
Great. Thanks, Bess. Jigger?
Yeah, well, I mean, ditto.
Yeah.
I mean, look, I think she's right. I do think that there are going to be a certain number of people who are empowered out of this around, things that epidemiologists have wanted us to do for a long time, like getting rid of handshakes and getting rid of some of the things that spread disease. And so I think some of that stuff is going to stick with us for a long time. But I do think from the clean energy industry's perspective, we've seen some slowdown in in-home energy efficiency, obviously, but otherwise we see all of it coming back and being essential, frankly, to getting the economy back to full employment.
Yeah, Jigger, when I was in the commerce position and had a lot of visitors from Asia, and they have the tradition of how they present their business card. I mean, here I am. I'm the typical Baltimore kid. I want to hug them, throw my arms around them, lift them up, and they're bowing and handing me their business card. I think that they had it right, and I had to develop some new skills along those lines. Jeffrey, COVID-19, new normal.
I think it really is. Just speaking from my own personal perspective, as my organization spent X amount of money every year paying for people to travel all over the country and all over the world. Like, we don't need to do that anymore. We're just not going to spend that money anymore because it turned out it wasn't necessary. The world didn't collapse because we're not traveling. That's like a really simple one. I also think, more people are going to, certainly some people are going to stay working from home for forever in some modified way. And I think, one sort of interesting impact of that, and to Trigger's point, I think the way that the clean energy industry has sort of moved through this has been extremely variable and really, really depends on what state you're in. But I've spoken to a number of folks from, the Florida Green Bank, the Solar Energy Loan Fund is an example where they've done more business in the last 5 months than they did in the prior 5 years, because in a place like Florida, all of a sudden everybody's stuck at home. They're blasting the air conditioning all day long, and holy cow, their energy bills are through the roof. They need to do something about it, and so they're investing in energy efficiency. Even just sort of a strange personal anecdote, I've moved out from the city to the suburbs. All of a sudden, I need a car, and so I got an electric vehicle because I wasn't going to buy a gas car. And so I think there are all these sort of like strange knock-on effects that actually will lead people to. This is forcing people to more closely consider a lot of their consumption choices, their behaviors, and I think on net actually is going to have a more accelerating impact on clean energy investment in the long run.
Great, thank you. Trent, you get your shot at new normal.
I think it'll be a cycle, right? I think, like Jeffrey, I think there's certain things that I don't think some of the business travel that we do will come back in full force. Although I enjoy the Zoom call, there is nothing like actually being, on a panel and participating in what would end up being a few sidebars with Jeff and Bessie and Jigger to really connect in a way that we won't, even if we scheduled a sidebar after this call, right? So I think there's some of that relationship building that we miss as an industry that I think is sometimes integral, particularly on the business development cycle. And so that's the piece that I do worry about, is sort of, being able to cultivate some of those relationships that are critical, particularly when it comes to getting in front of someone to make the sale. It may not matter as much when you're reviewing the credit and reviewing the investment decision, but sometimes in getting in front of someone to develop that relationship is important. Yeah. But I believe that there will be cycles, and so out of this pandemic that we're in, there will be opportunities, and you will see green shoots from in Florida and other areas where there's types of energy projects that'll be that'll accelerate, and you'll see some decelerate, and then over time. I hope that, my expectation is that we'll see, businesses continuing to adapt, because I know that we will on the capital side as well.
Great discussion on that, gang. Last question. Now get ready. This is the last question. It's still kind of rapid fire. So here's what happens in November. It's a dead heat. Congress can't resolve it. It goes to the Supreme Court, and each of you gets named to be the next president. What are your energy priorities? Come on, you're now the king. You can set the agenda. Jeffrey, why don't you go first? What do you want to do? President.
The first one is easy. Is I'd create a national green bank. That's what I do all day. I would just sort of declare it to be so. That one is easy.
You got to go more than that, Jeffrey. Come on.
Hey, come on. You got the big
Venture
job.
Out the comfort zone. Come on.
You get the big house, everything.
I would eliminate the investment tax credit and make it a direct cash grant. That's be first off the table. I would create an incentive a miles-based incentive for electric vehicles, so that I would not have been given a large cash payment to buy my EV, but I would be incentivized to drive the EV, because substituting VMT for is what matters, not just purchasing a vehicle. And so it created an incentive structure for vehicles to drive more and specifically target high mileage vehicles. Basically, you'd have to be an Uber driver or a truck driver to be eligible for it, because that's where we'd be incentivizing the conversion. And I'd probably plant trees all across Appalachia, because you can create a ton of jobs that way and put people back to work, and also it sucks carbon out of the air. Man, I've got a longer list than that, but those are a few things right off the top of my head.
No, you know, President Jeffrey, that gave us a start. Bessie, President Clark.
So President Clark, very simple. I would put a price on carbon. We really need a price on carbon, and that's the first thing I would do.
And that's it? Is there a second, third, or fourth?
I think there are lots of other supportive policies, you know, that can be helpful, but I think that that's probably the most important one, and most universal in terms of, you know, addressing the climate crisis.
Great, thanks, Bessie. President Shaw?
Well, I mean, I agree with Bessie most of the time here. I think, and you know, Jeff Eckel, who has been passionate on this issue. I think I would take it one step further. The U.S. government procures roughly 20% of everything in the United States. I think you would just change the entire GSA schedule to be carbon facing, right? And so everything from toilet paper to cars would basically be procured based on carbon. And I think that would just send shockwaves throughout the entire U.S. economy, because you would create scale for all of those technologies. And once they reach scale, the price differential with the polluting version would be non-existent. And my sense is that's, you know, and that's why I would phase out most of the tax credits, most of the subsidies. I mean, I actually think that we can compete head to head just based on the carbon content. But I think it's going to require a mandate from the federal government where they just say, effective immediately, you know, everybody's GSA schedule pricing has to be updated to reflect the social cost of carbon.
Thank you. And last, never least, President Allen, your thoughts? What do you want to do?
I would take all three ideas from my fellow panelists, enact them. And in addition to that, the thing that I would do is, in addition to that, one, you know, sort of have, you know, sort of a really set an aggressive price on carbon, while at the same time establishing something akin to almost like a stranded asset fund, right? Recognizing that as soon as we are starting to decarbonize, we'll need to work to deal with sort of the stranded assets that we have, particularly as we unwind some of those assets out of some of the investments. So it's just on the other side of the coin that basically recognizing that we will need to do something as we aggressively disrupt the economy in a good way for our health, but recognizing that we'll need to do something on that side as well.
Thank you, gang. You were awesome in this first part of our webinar. What we're going to do now is we're going to go to, I think we're going to wrap up with a couple polling questions, and then we're going right to the folks that have been patient to be participating and for Q&As that the audience might have. So let me see, can we pull up the live polling question? Here we go. I guess it's for everyone who's looking. Are you observing the need for more convenient and accessible energy project financing in your work? Are you observing the need for more convenient and accessible energy project financing in your work? Okay, I feel like that. What's that music? Do, 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 do. You only have a few seconds of that. So fill out something and hit the button. Look at that. Okay. Well, that's pretty cool. Can we go to the next one? I think we have one more question, right? Number 4, here we go. In which of the following project financing ranges do you find it challenging to secure affordable capital for the project to proceed? In other words, how much money do you need to move these projects forward? Just pick one. Do. Time's up.
Okay, that's my guess.
Okay, there we go. Thank you for that. Now, can we go to the general audience? Need a little help from the audience on any questions you might have of this esteemed panel.
There's 2 they asked before, Mike, that you could just go in and ask.
Yeah, Q&A.
Yeah, let's. We're talking about these 2, Jigger.
Yeah.
Well, let's take the first one. Electrical vehicle infrastructure development, local municipalities and private companies. I think we touched on it a bit. Jigger, you want to take it again, just to add thoughts to the question of Jason?
Yeah, I think the beauty of Maryland in particular is that Maryland, the vast majority of Marylanders actually have a dedicated place to park their car, right? Whether it's a garage or a carport or a street parking spot. It's, we're just unique from that perspective. So solving the problem of where people charge is super cheap. Level 2 chargers are now $500. So that's the majority of where people will charge with 200-mile range cars, right? You don't need that many fast chargers to actually support Marylanders. So like you've got, some fast chargers you can put in some public places, namely sort of gas stations almost. And then there's maybe some support for workplace charging. But I don't think the cost of this is expensive. I think the challenge is that we continue to sort of not really put the full weight of the state government behind how good this would be for state finances, right? I mean, having healthier utility companies, having more investment at, Maryland households, and then having lower healthcare costs to the Maryland state budget would be truly impressive and would cost very little money.
That's a great analogy, though, the healthcare costs and the way we control them in the state of Maryland, and we truly do.
Yeah.
Mike, this is Kathy. I want
Yes,
to ask the panel to talk a little bit about how other states have successfully invested targeted investments of public dollars to, and how we should be doing this in Maryland more successfully.
Kathy, you may have to do that one again. It cut off a little bit.
I think she was talking about how other states invested public dollars more successfully.
To attract more private capital, more as a leverage play.
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody?
Yeah.
I'll start.
So, I think, Maryland has a lot of different government agencies that are playing in this space in one way or another, or sort of quasi-governmental or nonprofits. So in some way, having some coordination or consolidation across that would be really helpful. I think there's some ambiguity in Maryland about who plays what role and what dollars are available for what purpose. And so it's sort of, in some ways, that's actually kind of the hardest part that we've seen from other states is, like we do a lot of work in California, and the general thinking is California doesn't need more public money going to clean energy. It's the problem is that there's 15 different agencies that are all doing different things that are hard to identify and clash, and getting them to coordinate is actually really hard. So I don't say that glibly. It's actually really challenging. I think having a more I'm a big fan of RFPs and creating competition. I think creating structures that will drive developers, investors, utilities to compete to benefit from public capital in some ways can create some interesting dynamics. It creates downward pressure on prices. New York Green Bank uses RFPs. Actually, the DC Green Bank just issued a general RFP, I think last week. But you can be even more targeted about it. So for instance, you could say, the state could issue an RFP saying, we want to convert the state fleet of vehicles to electric vehicles. Who can provide us that solution at the lowest cost possible? And here's public money to enable it, but whoever needs the least number of public dollars will win the bid. Something, I'm making that up, but you sort of get the general point. I think just being more sort of intentional and strategic about it. I don't think there's any sort of magic about if you use this financing tool, everything unlocks. Obviously, we're talking about different sectors here, but just being sort of coordinated and strategic about it, I think alone can go a long way.
I would also just add, I think that the states that have done a good job of leveraging public capital, particularly in sort of within their public enterprises to attract private dollars, have been capitalized with sufficient funding to address the issue, right? So I think one of the challenges that I see is that sometimes legislatures want to invest in clean energy on the cheap, right? So, all we can get passed is $15 million. So we'll give you $15 million and we tell you to go support capital efforts. And the truth of the matter is that's a rounding error for some of the projects that Bessie works on, right? And so it's not going to have as much of a impact if it is such a small amount of dollars. And so part of it becomes strategic in, one, identifying the level of capital or funding that's required to support a public entity such as a green bank or a financing authority, whatever the term is. But you need to have it sufficient enough that basically when you deploy that capital to marketplace, it can be deployed in structures that really aid or fill some of the gaps for providers of capital such as Hannon and Armstrong or Generate Capital. And that partnership of understanding where there is a need in a marketplace and sufficient capital to address it is incredibly important. And so I would say that in Maryland, to the extent that we can identify who's the right party, and maybe it's MCC or others, then it needs to be capitalized in a way that is significant enough that it can address the issues and really provide the catalytic type of capital that's needed to really make a difference, particularly for those providers of capital.
I'll maybe just chime in with some other comments too. I think we, are very excited about an RPS in Maryland. We have seen RPS in other states really support growth and do a lot of good things. Hannon invests over $1 billion a year, and up until recently, not much of that has been in Maryland. I cited a couple of examples, but I think, a strong community solar program, that's probably the fastest growing area in solar right now, is community solar. And so I think support for that program is very important. And also commercial PACE. So Hannon is very active in the commercial PACE market. And I think that's another kind of key area of untapped growth. And then I think just the last thing I'd highlight is corporates. We've seen over 250 corporates commit to 100% renewable energy targets. And, a lot of the developers and sponsors that we work with, are able to use that to just go straight to a corporate and essentially, solve for a renewable energy goal. And so I think, encouraging corporates to be part of that commitment just is another way that Maryland can stay involved and stay very relevant in the clean energy space.
No, I totally agree. I think one area that I would just shift to a little bit is people can do things different way. I don't think there's a prescribed way of doing it, but you just have to do it seriously. So I'll give you an example. If Maryland didn't want to put $500 million into a green bank, it could also do things through updating mandates. For instance, Maryland requires backup diesel generators for every hotel in the country or in the state for elevators. It literally makes no sense. They could be using battery storage to do that as well. But the rules don't allow battery storage to do that. The same thing's true for hospitals and nursing homes and schools. They're all required to have backup fossil fuel generation, which again, doesn't make any sense. You could create resiliency infrastructure. There's lots of us that are funding microgrids, and you could do it that way. And then, Maryland could update its regs to make sure that those qualify. And oh, by the way, once they're not diesel generators and they're either qualified natural gas gen sets from EPA or their battery storage, et cetera. Now you could bid that capacity into the PJM and actually get paid for an asset that's largely dead most of the time. On top of that, there are thousands, probably tens of thousands of Marylanders who've now installed backup diesel generators and natural gas generators at their homes because of the infrequent hurricanes that we get hit with, right? Home Depot and Lowe's just wheels out 18 wheelers, and they're sold out in 4 hours. And those generators are not installed properly. They don't work the second time you need it. But people have invested $5,000 into this thing that doesn't make any sense. And so I just think that part of this is actually saying people are already betting against the system. They're investing in resiliency because the utility companies are not reliable around providing power for these times. And there are infrastructure solutions that would be better solutions than what people are already investing their money into. And Maryland can actually fund the MCEC or others to actually make sure that that money is spent in a more productive way to decarbonize the state, right? So there are many ways of funding these types of things with public dollars, but Maryland is generally neither fish nor fowl. So it's sort of like, help do this at $10 million scale. Don't do this at $1 billion scale. And we need to actually say what we want to do, right? And so it's either mandates or it's a $500 million check in a green bank, but it's not neither mandates nor the $500 million check.
I think we probably have time for at least one or two more questions. I think we just touched on resiliency. Do you all see the questions?
Yep.
Which one would you like to take? Anybody, please.
Well, I'm happy to talk about sustainable startups. I mean, I do think that Maryland has done a lot to support sustainable startups. I would say that the challenge with the approach is that it's not what you really want, right? I mean, in general, I'd say that Maryland supports people through sort of equity investments. So our good friend Clara Broido Johnson runs one of the Maryland innovation funds. But what people really need are revenue contracts. And so what Maryland really should be doing to support these sustainable startups is say, hey, we're buying compost anyway from Pennsylvania. Why don't we buy compost from you, from Maryland, and use this contract as a way to get a 10% ownership stake in your company and support you this way, right? Or, from everything from salad dressing to electric vehicles. There's lots of things that Maryland supports with a $20,000 check, but instead should just do through procurement, right? And say, we're going to procure from these small businesses and give them revenue.
Excellent, excellent. Any other question up there that any of the gang would like to grab a hold of? Let's see. I'll tell you what, we're pretty close to touchdown anyway. So, gang, how about a good of the order? Good of the order. Final remarks. Kathy, by the way, Kath, I'm going to let you have the final remarks because you're the leader. And I know that Jeff Oxnam's on the call today. Jeff is the chairman of MCEA, and it's great to have Jeff as part of the team today.
Thanks,
so,
Mike.
So good of the order. Bessie, ladies first.
I guess I would just say, this has been a fantastic discussion, and I am just honored to be able to participate with everybody else, and thanks everyone for the opportunity.
Great. Thanks, Bessie. Jeff?
Yeah, I agree. It's a really fun conversation. I wish we could, as Trent said, I do just being able to be in a room with each other, but soon enough we'll be back there. And I think the last thing I can say is, as I say this in every conversation, go vote. If anybody had any question about whether they should vote, please go vote. Less than 2 months from today, go vote on November 3rd.
Do we vote once or twice?
Once. I'm not going to advocate for committing a felony. Only once.
It's sad we're even talking about
Is there any question?
Trent, please.
Once again, thank you, Kathy, for putting this panel together, and Mike for moderating it. My last comment is sort of something that Jigger said that I think about sort of is all throughout, that is a thread through all of this, is like just being intentional, right? So Maryland needs to decide what Maryland wants to do. And I think the country, many states need to decide what they want to do, and then create a plan, and then that is aggressive and use the tools and levers that you have in place to really achieve it, right? And really have a focus around it, recognizing that there is a great deal of expertise that is within the state, and in my case, looking into the state from my home. And so how do you leverage that and utilize that to really accelerate deployment that not only deals with carbon emissions, but Mike, to your point earlier, really has a way that can expand economic opportunity, not only just at the industry level, but even at the community level, particularly for those communities who may not have been able to participate, or who may be dealing with some of the worst impacts of climate change and also some of the health issues. So I think there's a way to do all those things, but it has to be intentional, and you have to garner the requisite levers to make that happen. So thank you.
Thank you, Trent. And President Shaw, just to wrap it up.
Change locations on it, huh?
I would ask people to read a report that was written, partially by Marylanders, with Alex Lasky from OPower, called Rewiring America. And that report basically says very clearly that even if we don't retire fossil fuel assets early, but instead just make sure that every new purchase that we make is good stuff instead of bad stuff, we would be able to dramatically reduce carbon emissions. And this is something Maryland could lead on easily, because we have, I would say, literally all of the smartest people in the world on green buildings, on electric vehicles, on renewable portfolio standards were largely invented by folks in Maryland. I mean, it's one of those things where, like, this is where all the ideas originate, and then we go to California or New York to implement them. And it feels like this is the place where we should implement them. And my sense is that if the state decided that it really wanted to be a leader in creating a new model, one that's not Republican or Democrat, one that is just intentional about smart decarbonization, that we are the place that is best equipped to do it. And I'd love to be a part of that, and hope that everyone in the audience here is willing to join us to do that.
Jigger, when I was in the commerce role, I used to say to groups of people that I'm apolitical. But then I would say that if economic development is a political statement, then I'm really political. Because if it can drive positive economic development, we all win. As really been a theme of this whole conversation that we've had. So it's been an honor for me to meet all of you and to be able to participate in this great webinar that Kathy and MCEA and her team put together. So Kathy, you wrap it up.
Thanks, Mike. And thanks to all the panelists. As you all observed, we do have a wealth of knowledge available in Maryland. And I think the points that, the salient point in summary is that we need to leverage that expertise. We need to leverage investment. We need to leverage policy and regulation to decarbonize the country, to decarbonize our state. And I think that leadership is the other piece of the matrix that we need to add to that, that summary, that it takes leadership. And I would call on all of you and all of you who are in the Maryland Clean Energy Center to begin to move that. We'll close it out today, and thank you all again for your participation.